I first took a quiz in a book maybe 10 years ago before I ever knew what Enneagram was. And it's like any personality test, it's like, oh, like this permission to be the way that you are. And when I found out I was type 2, the helper, I mean, it just everything clicked. My family, but we're Greek American, and very much about service and especially the women in my family, food and just like bringing the family together in that way is such a huge part of how I grew up. And so being the helper and doing what I do too, the pieces kind of clicked together.
Yeah. Okay. So tell us a little bit in your own words how you are helping your clients right now. What is the work that you do?
Yes. So the work that I do is I work with online brands, coaches, content creators, and I help them to find what I call legal blind spots. And so things that, you don't know what you don't know. And so I will go in and look for, are the right contracts in place to protect your business? Are you protecting that creative content the way that it needs to be protected? Is your brand name protected? Are we doing all the things that we're supposed to be doing in terms of marketing? If there are sponsorships, if there are affiliate links, all those little tweaks to make sure that, when you're making money online, that everything's protected.
What would you say is one of the most common blind spots that you run into a lot with your clients or that you see a lot out there with us coaches and consultants?
The most common blind spots. Well, I can think of two. One is kind of contract related, especially when it comes to coaches. There are kind of two big things that stand out to me in a coaching contract, and one is online. Do you want to hear all of them?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So in terms of a coaching contract, the two things that stick out to me most are number one, maybe not being specific enough in your scope, or you might call it, your service package or whatever it is, but the devil's in the details. And a lot of times, people hear contract and they get a little bit tense and they just, grit their teeth a little bit because contracts sound like intimidating and you don't really want to have to deal with it, especially if you're like me and you're a helper and you're just like, I just want to get in there and do. Right. But the contract is there to just make sure everybody's on the same page. And so being specific in what's included, and that's not just, monthly coaching call, that's 60-minute monthly coaching call, putting those parameters in there so that, again, everyone's on the same page and everyone's expectations are meeting up at the beginning of that relationship. So that's the first thing. The second thing is having some kind of cancellation policy. And that's not a rescheduling policy. It's if you're signing a 6-month, contract for coaching services, what happens if the client wants to quit at month 3? Is there some kind of fee? Is there not? I always say, as I am learning about boundaries myself, and boundaries are a big thing in coaching anyway, you as a coach have so many hours in a day. And if someone terminates at month 3, well, you've set aside that time and maybe turned down other business because you had that time filled up. So thinking through whatever that means for you, the coach, what would be fair, compensation for someone that wants to terminate early. So those are my two big coaching contract things.
That's so good. I'm glad you brought those up because I think that, most of us, whether you have the type 2 helper energy or not, are in this type of work because some type of reason around wanting to make a difference, make an impact. And, you just think, oh my God, everything's going to be great. I'm going to work with these amazing clients. Everything's going to go great. And then something happens. And this actually happened to me recently, but around a speaking opportunity. And I had been planning and preparing and working on my slides and my content. And then about 7 days before I was supposed to, a little over, I don't know, 8, whatever, it doesn't matter, a little over a week before that was supposed to happen, they needed to cancel. And thank God I had something in there that talked about cancellation and just
Yeah.
rescheduling, because I would have lost all that time potentially had they just wanted to flat out cancel. So that was the first moment for me where I was like, thank God that I had had something in there. Right. So it is important.
Yep, for sure.
Well, for somebody who, and I don't know if you do this, but I'm just kind of curious, for somebody who's like, okay, I have a contract, I'm not sure how solid it is, or like, I don't even know, like I'm kind of starting out, I'm just shooting by what it was that shooting from the hip right
Yes.
now. What's a resource, or how do you, what would you recommend getting started with a solid contract?
I would recommend, well, I do coaching contracts. But just start thinking through the client relationship and what I kind of said the devil is in the details, what you're going to be providing and where the risks might be. I think that communities are really helpful in this instance because especially when you're starting out, you want to know what's normal, quote unquote, in the coaching world and how to deal with certain situations. So if you can find a good community to help you there, that's great. Of course, don't take legal advice in like Facebook groups, but and
Disclaimer.
this is all educational anyway. What I'm saying, legal advice would be very specific to someone individually, but in terms of getting started, yes, think through that client relationship, think through things that could go wrong and what you would want to happen, in that cancellation context, for example.
Okay. Okay. And then speaking of relationships with our clients, I want just to hear a little bit about how that type 2 energy shows up for you in your client relationships, because I know from my own experience working with type 2s, and then just, what the stereotypical 2, they are known as the helper for a reason, right? And they get value and worth from helping others. And the type 2, for listeners who maybe aren't as familiar, they are really in touch with emotions, being in that heart center, but it tends to be other people's emotions and really tending and caring for those. And then as a coach, consultant, service provider, with that energy, I can see there being some challenges or some issues around potentially burnout and that type of thing. So I would just be curious, like, what about that resonates with you? What challenges have you had to work through? And any advice for working through some of those challenges from your own lessons learned?
Yes. So I started my practice in 2015, but before that, I worked for another law firm and we did litigation, which is going to court, right? And arguing in court. And I knew when I started my practice that I was not going to do litigation because it is such there's reasons why there are court dramas, right? It's so emotional. The client is extremely emotionally invested. Usually there's a conflict, of course, with the other side. And so I was feeling, my client's feelings. And so that certainly has been something that I've had to, now that I don't do litigation, I will still do, demand letters and cease and desist and that kind of thing for current clients. So I have to be careful with, looking at the law, like remembering my role, not getting too emotionally invested because of that, taking on of other people's emotions and just really wanting to help, like wanting to fix it and fixing everything. And I think also part of that is not wanting to disappoint a client. One of the things that I do a lot for my clients is trademark work, and that's trademark clearance and making sure a name is available to be used. And, at the very beginning, if I would get bad results, it was like, you feel that crushing disappointment before I even tell the client, right? But some of it is reframing too. Yes, I want to get my client a registered trademark. I really do. But I also want to keep them out of a lawsuit and keep them from wasting money on a trademark that just doesn't look like it's going to work. And so, these things that we learn as we're in business and kind of reframing and growing from places of tension, but not wanting to disappoint certainly is one of those things that creeps up too.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And again, like we can all feel these things, but it does have, these tendencies of these specific types. And so it really is interesting. I know that you have also done some content, on your website, on social media around boundaries in your contracts. What type of advice or what types of things should we be thinking about? Again, I know this isn't legal advice, but just things to think about, ask ourselves around creating healthy boundaries in those contracts.
I think that one thing to think about is, I mentioned being specific in what's included in your packages. If it's a monthly coaching call, how long is it? And people use Voxer a lot, right, in the coaching community, or what's the other one? Marco Polo.
Oh, Marco
like
Polo, or yeah.
Marco
Is
Polo,
it
Polo, something, the video version, right?
Yes.
Of Voxer. And so what's the expectation in terms of how quickly you will respond to a client? And so there's that response time, and there's also, almost office hours, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., 8 to 5. When should a client expect you to be available to them? Setting that out and creating that boundary, it benefits everybody.
Yeah, and then I also, yes, Voxer is very I know widely used a lot. And then I also had a friend who shared a contract of hers a couple years ago, and she has weekly sessions. And in her contract, she says, "You're welcome to Voxer me, you're welcome to email me, but I'm not going to respond. Like, I'll just have that information for our call, but you're welcome to give me updates." And I was like, oh my God, I kind of like that. Yeah. And so she just said, it's a space. It's here if you need to vent about something, but I won't be responding until our next call. So, again, just kind of that there's all kinds of boundary options. I guess just understanding what's going to work for you.
Yes. Yes, that's great. That's almost like, you hear of people who say, I check emails between 11 and 2 each day, but that's it.
Yes.
That's another type of boundary that you could set.
Yes, I've heard that before too. Now, this is kind of a personal question. So if you don't want to answer, you don't have to, we'll edit it out. But I know that you are a mother as well as a business owner. Would you be willing to share a specific boundary that you have put in place, maybe that recently, or not recently, but when you became a mother, that maybe changed, or just something that like wasn't working that you maybe had to shift a little bit?
Oh, interesting. Well, I, in terms of boundaries, I mean, I have help, which I didn't have with my firstborn. He was born in 2018. And so when he really started getting mobile and loud and everything, it was 2020 and everyone was at home. And I feel like that, because everyone was at home, everyone was a little bit more forgiving in terms of noise and everything, in the background. So in terms of boundaries, I mean, he's almost 4 now. And so we're just starting to get into, mom needs to be with the baby or mom needs to work. And so slowly learning those boundaries, which are constantly
being
pushed.
You brought up COVID, and this is a conversation that I've had a lot. And I know that it has absolutely been happening with entrepreneurs and corporate professionals alike, where the boundary of like when you stop working because you're working from home. And so that line, that transition that you used to have in the car or whatever is not as clear.
Yes.
Do you have any boundaries around like hard stop at this time and then I don't look at it, or just what does that look like for you out of curiosity?
Yes, I have a hard stop at 2:45 every day.
Okay.
And it's not something that I necessarily, put out there into the world in terms of like in my email signature or even in my contract, but from 2:45 until, after dinner time, I'm in family zone and with my kids. And that's just kind of what the season that I'm in right now. I also, in terms of work boundaries, started, when my second born was born, started doing almost like a Q&A session instead of live consultations. I do now have a 15-minute consultation if you need some help figuring out where to go next. But in terms of these Q&A sessions, which I used to do, where you sign up, you pay the fee, and I'll just answer your legal questions for a half hour, 45 minutes. I've transitioned that completely because it was too hard to schedule with doing my actual client work and being there for my family. So now I've changed those to a pre-recorded. Basically, the client will fill out a form and give me the questions, and then I will do a pre-recorded, almost like a presentation. So that in a way, that was a boundary that I had to draw in terms of spending my time in the most valuable way.
Okay. And I saw that offering on your website and I was like, that is so, and even like on the receiving end, that felt really freeing because I was like, oh, I'll just ask my question. And then I don't feel the pressure to have like another Zoom call on my calendar. It's just like, you'll send it. And I absolutely love that. I can see that being used in all kinds of different areas of business. And so I love that you brought that up. Okay. So I'm going to ask you just a couple more Enneagram questions. And I know that they're always a little personal. So again, just share what you want to share. So I don't know how familiar you are with the arrows, like the stress arrow and the growth arrow, a little bit, maybe. I'm always kind of curious, for the twos, especially women twos, tend to come across as like really soft and warm and friendly and helpful and caring and giving and all those things. Right. And then also, there tends to be like when you have like maxed out your coping strategies in a stressful situation, those defense mechanisms, type twos have a tendency to make a lateral move to the most stressed out qualities of the type 8, which the type 8 is the most aggressive. They get dubbed as being really domineering. They get dubbed as being angry. Sometimes they'll just say they're really passionate though. But for some twos, I just was interviewing this female two a couple of months ago. She said, I have a highway to my 8. So when I get angry, like I have this highway. Does that resonate with you? Do you experience that for our fellow twos who sometimes might feel like, gosh, it's bad, or I shouldn't get mad, but I do. I help, give, and then I break. Does that resonate with you?
Yes. And that is so interesting because I always thought it as kind of a heritage thing for me because, you said passionate. That is the word, right? I tend to get very passionate about something just when I'm pushed to a certain point. Otherwise, I very much, and then I kind of talk about this in business, especially as women business owners and entrepreneurs, there's this, I don't know if you want to call it a theory, but this stance that people take that we have to be, just as aggressive as men can be and like do business in a very masculine way. And I say no to that. I say you can embrace your feminine, whatever it is to you, whatever it means to you, your naturally, your natural emotions and your natural strengths in your business. You don't have to force something that's not working. But yes, if I'm pushed to a certain point, yeah, Mama Bear comes out.
You got this t-shirt. For those of you listening, she literally has a t-shirt that says this. So that is a true story. That is true. It's on a t-shirt.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I always, again, this is just really interesting to hear like how this shows up, if it does for you in real life versus like what's in the books. But according to Enneagram theory too, the flip side of that is we have this like growth arrow. For the type 2, it's the type 4, which tends to be a little bit more individual, focused on themselves and how they're feeling. And so it's a great compliment to take in that energy for the 2 who tends to be so others focused. So I'd be curious how if that at all resonates with you, if that's something you've been intentional about, and if not, what are some things as a mom, as a business owner, just as a human being that you do to care for yourself beyond maybe just, I know we talk about like self-care and that's kind of overused, but I would be curious, like, what is that for you so that you can continue to be a great mom, to be a great partner, to be a great business owner?
Yes. Yes, that certainly resonates. It's hard. It's really hard. It's really hard to do, especially, as my family grows. And I feel like some of this is seasonal, right? And
Mhm.
in some seasons, I mean, if there's a newborn, it's the hardest. But I'm currently in a season where, before I open a single email, before I start engaging and doing client work, I set aside 10 minutes. I open my Calm app. Sometimes it's to meditate, sometimes it's to hear, like birds chirping and, just some peaceful background noise. I can write out, journal for 4 or 5 minutes on how I'm feeling in my body, and, really I've worked to really tune into, what do I feel like doing today? Some things, yes, have to get done in a certain time frame, but do I feel like recording a YouTube video today? Or do I feel like maybe, looking through some analytics and seeing how, my emails are doing, or something like that. So to me, that's my self-care, is carving out a certain amount of time before I have to jump into client work to kind of set the stage, if you will.
Yeah.